There is a specific kind of quiet that settles over a house late on a Tuesday evening when the dishes are done and the only light comes from the glow of a laptop screen. You are sitting at the kitchen table, looking at a retirement projection calculator. You type in your current age, perhaps 35 or 40, along with your current household income and your current savings balance. Then you press calculate, and you look at the projected number the software tells you that you need in order to safely stop working. Almost invariably, that final number the software shows you is staggering. It is $1 million, or perhaps $2 million, or even a staggering $3 million. The screen presents this figure not as a suggestion, but as necessity. It represents an absolute mathematical necessity, a literal financial cliff edge. If you reach it, you will finally be safe and secure. If you fall short, you face a bleak and uncertain older age. You look at your current account balance, perhaps $30,000, or maybe it is closer to $80,000 right now. And then you look back at that massive seven-figure requirement. A profound sense of defeat washes over you in this moment. It feels less like a tangible financial goal and more like a punishment for not choosing a more lucrative career, or for having medical bills, or for simply living a normal life with normal, unavoidable expenses. You close the laptop and walk away, feeling like you have lost. A game you barely understand how to play, feeling defeated and lost. This feeling of defeat is rooted in a universally accepted belief. The belief is that retirement requires a massive dragon-like hoard of wealth, usually defined as a minimum of $1 million in the bank. We are taught from a very young age to view retirement exclusively as a net worth problem. The logic seems sound. Things are constantly getting more expensive. Inflation slowly erodes purchasing power. Healthcare costs are rising at an uncomfortable rate. And modern medicine means people are living longer than ever before. Therefore, the assumption is that you must stockpile an enormous mountain of capital to weather the decades of unemployment at the end of your life. This narrative is incredibly sticky because it plays directly on our deepest human anxieties about survival, independence, and the fear of becoming a burden to others. It is also heavily reinforced by a financial services industry that fundamentally makes its money by managing large pools of accumulated assets. The more you are convinced you need to save, the more capital flows into the investment vehicles they manage, and the higher their fee revenues climb. But when we systematically dismantle this belief and look at the actual grounded mechanics of living, the illusion begins to fracture. Retirement is not a net worth problem. It is a cash flow problem. You do not buy your weekly groceries with your total net worth. You do not pay property taxes or utility bills with net worth. You pay for those things with monthly income instead. The massive lump sum is only one way to generate that income. Focusing on the size of the pile distracts from the actual goal. The goal is ensuring enough dollars flow into your checking account. Each month must cover the exact amount of dollars flowing out. When you deliberately shift your perspective from accumulating a mountain of wealth to simply bridging a monthly income gap, the underlying math changes entirely. To understand why the massive pile of money is often an unnecessary illusion, we have to look closely at the structural realities and constraints of a normal income. Most people do not earn $200,000 a year. They earn something closer to $60,000 or $75,000 a year. Out of that ordinary income, they must pay for housing, transportation, food, federal and state taxes, and basic debt service. The margin left over for investing is naturally heavily constrained. You cannot simply decide to save your way to $2 million if your income has a hard structural ceiling and your fixed costs are relatively rigid. Effort and willpower cannot override mathematical constraints. There is a strict order of operations that dictates where money must logically go. High-interest consumer debt, such as credit card balances, must be systematically addressed before any meaningful wealth accumulation can begin. Because the interest charged on a revolving credit card will silently consume the returns of almost any investment portfolio. Life also happens in the middle of these perfectly plotted financial plans. A roof suddenly needs to be replaced, a vehicle transmission fails, a child needs expensive dental work, or an aging parent requires temporary care. These are not failures of personal budgeting. They are the normal, predictable frictions of living a human life. When financial commentary ignores these very real constraints and simply tells you to cut expenses or hustle harder, it creates a toxic cycle of shame. It implies that if you do not have $1 million sitting in a brokerage account, it is because you bought too much coffee or simply did not want financial independence badly enough. But the reality is the underlying structure of an average American financial life does not easily support the rapid accumulation of a seven-figure portfolio without extreme deprivation, a highly unusual income trajectory, or a significant inheritance. Let us ground this concept in a realistic, numerical scenario to see how the numbers actually behave when we focus exclusively on monthly cash flow rather than a lifetime hoard. Imagine a household where the baseline cost of living has been completely stripped of their standard working year expenses. The 30-year mortgage is now fully paid off. The children are independent and living on their own. The daily commuting costs and professional wardrobe expenses have vanished. The mandatory payroll taxes have all vanished as well. They determine their total necessary living expenses are $4,500. They receive $2,000 a month in combined Social Security benefits. This remains the foundational bedrock of American retirement income. Despite frequent dramatic narratives to the contrary, this leaves a defined gap of exactly $2,500 a month that must be supplied by their own accumulated savings. $2,500 a month equals exactly $30,000 a year. To safely generate $30,000 a year using standard, conservative portfolio withdrawal metrics, an individual or couple would need an investment portfolio of roughly $750,000. While $750,000 is undeniably a substantial sum of money, it is mathematically light years away from the $2 million or $3 million target so often pushed by automated retirement calculators. The entire premise of reaching safety rests on defining that exact gap. The $2,500 retirement plan is not about having millions, it is about building just enough capital to reliably produce $2,500 every 30 days. Let us explore a second scenario, because life certainly does not always allow for a paid-off mortgage by age 65. Consider a lifelong renter, someone who will carry housing costs indefinitely into their older years. Their required monthly baseline will naturally be higher, perhaps $5,500 a month to cover rent, utilities, food, and insurance. If their Social Security benefit is slightly higher, perhaps $2,500 a month due to a longer earning history, their remaining gap is exactly $3,000 a month. Generating $3,000 a month requires a larger portfolio, perhaps somewhere around $900,000. But even in this scenario, with permanent monthly housing costs, the total still falls short of the mythical $1 million threshold. The math reveals a powerful truth. The required portfolio size is completely subservient to the size of the monthly gap. If you can control the gap, you inherently control the finish line. This is precisely why paying off a mortgage or relocating to a region with significantly lower property taxes is mathematically equivalent to saving hundreds of thousands of dollars in a brokerage account. Removing $1,000 of permanent monthly expenses from your future life has the exact same mathematical impact as adding roughly $300,000 to your investment portfolio. The deliberate reduction of future fixed costs is the most powerful, yet least discussed, lever in the entire personal finance ecosystem. It is almost always far easier to structurally eliminate a future bill than it is to save the heavy capital required to perpetually pay it. Understanding this direct relationship between the monthly gap and the portfolio size fundamentally changes how you view progress across different stages of your life. When you are in your 20s or early 30s, the concept of saving enough money to eventually replace your entire working income feels completely absurd. Your income is likely lower. Your housing costs are at their peak relative to your earnings, and you might be managing student loan debt. At this early stage, attempting to optimize for a massive retirement number is often counterproductive because structural constraints prevent rapid capital accumulation. The primary strategy in those early years is not building the mountain. It is simply about establishing the behavioral habit of investing and capturing whatever employer matching funds might be available to you. The usefulness of highly aggressive saving strategies simply does not apply yet. For the vast majority of people, these intense methods are premature. As you move into your 40s and 50s, the landscape shifts. Incomes generally stabilize or reach their peak during these prime years. Heavy early life costs like full-time daycare slowly begin to disappear. Entry-level consumer debt also starts to fade from your monthly budget. This is the stage where the monthly gap gains sharper focus. You see exactly what your fixed costs look like in 20 years. Financial progress is measured sequentially over the course of many decades. You first focus on earning and basic survival, then you focus on stabilizing. Next, you eliminate debt and intentionally widen the margin of your earnings. It is a slow, methodical sequence, not a rapid or frantic race. Certain financial strategies only become relevant and effective in specific life decades. This removes the heavy pressure to perform perfectly from your very first day. You are not failing if you aren't maxing out investments at 28. You are simply operating in a different, necessary stage of the sequence. When we observe what actually happens as normal people transition out of the workforce, their behavior rarely matches the sterile, worst-case projections of financial calculators. Very few people hit a magical net worth number and abruptly sever all ties to earning income on a random Friday afternoon. The practical reality is far more fluid, gradual, and adaptable. People naturally adjust to their immediate constraints and lifestyle needs. If their monthly gap is slightly larger than their accumulated portfolio can safely support, they do not face immediate financial ruin. Instead, they find creative ways to adapt and bridge the gap. They might take on part-time work, not out of desperate survival, but because a job requiring merely 10 or 15 hours a week completely covers the remaining monthly shortfall in their budget. Earning just $1,000 a month through light, low-stress work is the exact mathematical equivalent of having an additional $300,000 sitting quietly in a retirement account. Other people adapt by structurally altering their living arrangements. They sell the large home they raised their children in and move to a smaller, more efficient living space, simultaneously reducing their property taxes and cutting their utility bills, extracting built-up home equity to significantly bolster their investment portfolio. They also naturally streamline their daily consumption patterns. Their routines no longer revolve around expensive career conveniences. They cook more meals at home and save money. They travel during off-peak seasons when costs are lower. The transition to this new lifestyle is highly organic. Behavioral patterns under the constraint of a fixed income heavily tend toward efficiency and practical adaptation rather than the catastrophic failure predicted by rigid financial models. People figure it out. They intelligently piece together Social Security, modest portfolio withdrawals, and perhaps a small stream of secondary income to carefully build a bridge over their specific gap. They do not need to be wealthy to be secure. They only need to be balanced and focused. Furthermore, the insistence on massive capital accumulation ignores how spending patterns evolve. The financial services industry routinely projects a flat or increasing spending line. This projection is usually driven by the fear of catastrophic healthcare costs. While medical expenses are a genuine constraint and must be factored in, the broader pattern of human behavior shows a very distinct downward curve. In the initial years after stopping full-time work, spending might briefly spike. This happens as individuals travel or pursue their long-deferred hobbies. However, as they move into their mid-70s and 80s, spending declines. The physical desire and capacity to travel extensively or dine out wane. The urge to purchase new consumer goods naturally begins to fade away. Life gradually becomes more local, more routine, and inherently less expensive. The $2,500 monthly gap we calculated earlier might slowly shrink to $2,000 or even $1,500 as the decades quietly pass. The investment portfolio, rather than being drained at a constant, alarming rate, often stabilizes or even continues to grow because the required monthly withdrawals naturally decrease over time. The deep-seated fear of outliving one's money, which drives the obsession with the million-dollar target, is very often based on the completely faulty assumption that an 85-year-old will spend money at the exact same velocity and intensity as a 55-year-old. They will not. The human body and natural human desires ultimately enforce a much lower withdrawal rate in the later stages of life. This brings us all the way back to the quiet reality of the kitchen table and the glowing light of the laptop screen. The sharp anxiety generated by the retirement calculator is largely an artificial construct. It is the direct result of applying a corporate, institutional mindset to a deeply personal and very human transition. A large corporation needs infinite growth and massive reserves of capital to survive an unpredictable and volatile global market. A human being only needs basic shelter and consistent food, a stable community, and exactly enough predictable monthly cash flow to maintain their quiet dignity in their later years. You do not need to build a massive financial empire to secure your final decades and your personal peace. You only need to carefully, methodically build a system that produces exactly what you require, and not a single dollar more than what is necessary for your life. The primary work of your financial life is not to endlessly accumulate capital. It is not about gathering wealth without a clear and specific purpose. Instead, accurately define the precise perimeter of your actual needs and requirements. Then, construct a reliable, boring mechanism to meet those specific financial needs. Once that mechanism is firmly in place, your financial task is entirely complete. Whether it relies on a portfolio of $500,000 or $800,000, the rest of your time and energy can then be returned to the actual business of living.